I never imagined that the woman who taught me to stand on my own 2 feet would one day try to pull the ground from beneath me. But life has a way of showing you who people really are when money enters the picture. My name is Victoria Chen, and this is the story of how my mother-in-law taught me the most painful lesson of my life. Before I begin, I want to say something. If you feel my words, show your support by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. And tell me from which city you belong, so I can see how far a woman's impactful voice can reach. Help me build this community so we can bring more truthful stories for you. I met Daniel Hayes when I was 26 years old, working as a junior architect in Boston. He was charming, ambitious, and had this way of making everyone in the room feel important. But what truly won my heart was his relationship with his mother, Eleanor. The way he spoke about her, the respect and love in his voice, it made me believe I was marrying into a family that valued the things I did. Loyalty, respect, unconditional love. Eleanor Hayes was a formidable woman. At 68, she had built a successful catering business from scratch after her husband passed away 30 years ago. She was sharp, independent, and commanded respect wherever she went. During our courtship, she welcomed me warmly. She'd invite me to her home in Cambridge, teach me her secret recipes, and share stories about Daniel's childhood. I felt chosen, special, like I'd gained not just a husband, but a second mother. We married in the spring of 2019, a beautiful ceremony in Eleanor's garden. She insisted on paying for half of everything, despite our protests. That's the kind of woman she is, she'd say with pride. Independent, fair, generous. I believed her then. God, how I believed her. The first 3 years of our marriage were wonderful. Daniel and I bought a modest townhouse in Brookline. We both worked hard, saved diligently, and started planning for children. Eleanor visited often, always bringing food, always offering advice that seemed genuinely helpful. She'd comment on our decorating choices, our financial decisions, even our relationship dynamics. But I took it as motherly concern. After all, she'd been alone for so long. Maybe she just wanted to feel needed. The cracks started showing in small ways I dismissed at the time, because I wanted so badly to maintain that perfect family image. Eleanor would make comments about my career. Do you really need to work such long hours, Victoria? Shouldn't you be thinking about giving me grandchildren? Or she'd compare me to Daniel's ex-girlfriend, Sarah. Sarah always made time for family dinners. Sarah knew how to make Daniel's favorite dishes without asking for the recipe. I swallowed my discomfort and tried harder. I cut back my hours at work. I attended every family dinner, even when I was exhausted. I learned to make Daniel's favorite pot roast exactly the way Eleanor taught me. But it was never quite enough. There was always something missing. Some way I fell short of whatever impossible standard she'd set. Then came the phone call that changed everything. It was a Tuesday evening in September, 3.5 years into our marriage. Daniel and I were having dinner when his phone rang. He spoke in hushed tones, his face growing pale, and when he hung up, his hands were shaking. "What's wrong?" I asked, my heart already beginning to race. "It's Mom. She had a stroke. She's in the hospital." We rushed to Massachusetts General Hospital, where Eleanor lay in a bed, looking smaller and more vulnerable than I'd ever seen her. The doctor explained that she'd had a moderate stroke. She would recover, but she'd need extensive rehabilitation and couldn't live alone for at least 6 months, possibly longer. "She'll need round-the-clock care initially," the doctor said. "After a few weeks, she'll need someone with her, most of the time, helping with daily tasks, driving her to therapy appointments, managing her medications." Daniel looked at me. I knew what he was asking before he said a word. "We can't put her in a facility, Victoria. She'd hate that. She's always been so independent." "Of course not," I said, taking his hand. "She'll stay with us. We'll figure it out. I meant it. Despite the tension, despite the little comments and comparisons, Eleanor was family. She was Daniel's mother. She'd welcomed me in her way. This was what family did. They took care of each other. What I didn't know was that Eleanor had been planning something for months before that stroke. Something that would reveal exactly how she saw me. And it wasn't as family. Eleanor moved into our guest room 2 weeks later. The first month was exhausting, but manageable. I took a leave of absence from work, something my boss wasn't happy about, but understood. Every day was a routine of medications, physical therapy exercises, meal preparation, and doctor's appointments. Daniel helped when he could, but his job as a financial consultant demanded long hours and frequent travel. "You're so good with her," he'd say, kissing my forehead before leaving for another business trip. "I don't know what we'd do without you." I was good with her. I was patient when she snapped at me for bringing the wrong tea. I was gentle when she cried from frustration at her slow recovery. I was encouraging when she struggled through her exercises. I held her hand when she confessed her fears about never regaining her independence. In those quiet moments, I thought we were bonding. I thought this terrible situation was bringing us closer. I was so naive. One afternoon, about 6 weeks into her stay, Eleanor was napping, and I was cleaning up the kitchen when I noticed her purse had fallen off the table, its contents spilling across the floor. As I gathered everything up, a folded paper caught my eye. It was sticking out of her wallet, and I wouldn't have paid attention except I saw Daniel's name on it. I shouldn't have looked. I know that. But something in my gut told me I needed to see what it was. I unfolded the paper with trembling hands. It was a copy of Eleanor's will. Recent, dated just 3 months before her stroke. My eyes scanned the pages, and with each line I read, my heart sank deeper. Eleanor's estate was substantial. The house in Cambridge alone was worth over $1 million. Then there were her investment accounts, savings. The business she'd sold 2 years ago. Altogether, nearly $2.3 million. According to the will, Daniel would inherit everything. The house, the investments, every penny. That part didn't surprise me. But then I read the conditions, and my hands started shaking so badly I almost dropped the paper. This inheritance is to be given solely to my son, Daniel Marcus Hayes, for his use and benefit alone. Under no circumstances is this inheritance to be considered marital property. In the event that Daniel is married at the time of my death, he is required to place all inherited assets in a separate account, inaccessible to his spouse. Should Daniel divorce, 100% of any remaining inherited assets shall remain his sole property. Furthermore, I designate that my daughter-in-law, Victoria Lin Chen, is to receive nothing from my estate. She has proven herself to be a career-focused woman who does not prioritize family values. She has delayed giving me grandchildren and has shown more interest in her professional pursuits than in building a proper home for my son. There was more. Detailed instructions about how Daniel should manage the money, suggestions that he reconsider his marriage if I continued to prioritize my career, even a provision that if we had children, Daniel should establish trusts that I couldn't access. I stood in that kitchen, holding that piece of paper, and felt something break inside me. This woman, whom I was caring for day and night, who I was bathing and feeding and supporting through one of the hardest times of her life, had legally declared that I was worthless, undeserving, a gold digger who needed to be protected against. The cruelest part was the timing. She'd updated this will 3 months before her stroke, right around the time I'd told her and Daniel that I'd been offered a promotion at work. A senior architect position that would mean more responsibility and better pay. I'd been so excited. Daniel had been proud. Eleanor had smiled tightly and said, "Well, I hope you'll still have time for family." Now I understood. That promotion had confirmed her worst suspicions about me. I was a career woman, an unsuitable wife, someone who needed to be cut out before I could contaminate her son's inheritance with my greedy hands. I carefully refolded the paper and put it back exactly where I'd found it. Eleanor never knew I'd seen it. I didn't tell Daniel. Not then. I needed time to think, to process what this meant for my marriage and my future. That night, lying next to my sleeping husband, I made a decision. I wouldn't stop caring for Eleanor. I wouldn't treat her any differently, but I would protect myself. I would document everything I did for her, every sacrifice I made, every hour I spent as her caretaker. Because if Eleanor thought I was the kind of woman who'd fight for what I deserved, she was absolutely right. I just wouldn't fight the way she expected. The next 3 months were the hardest of my life. Every morning, I woke up and cared for a woman who declared me unworthy of basic respect. I smiled while helping her shower. I encouraged her through painful therapy sessions. I cooked her favorite meals and listened to her stories and pretended that paper didn't exist. But I was documenting everything. I kept a detailed journal of every task I performed, every appointment I drove her to, every night I stayed up late because she needed help. I saved receipts for every expense. I tracked every hour away from my job, calculating the lost income and career advancement. I also started meeting with a lawyer, discreetly, a woman named Patricia Rodriguez who specialized in family law and estate planning. I showed her the photo I'd taken of Eleanor's will before putting it back. Patricia's face remained neutral, but I saw anger flash in her eyes. "This is cruel," she said. "And depending on your state's laws regarding marital property and caregiver compensation, potentially actionable." "I don't want to take Eleanor's money," I told her. "That's not who I am. But I also won't be erased like I never mattered." "You matter, Victoria. What you're doing matters. Let's make sure it's recognized." Patricia helped me understand my options. In Massachusetts, I could potentially make a claim for caregiver compensation if I could prove I'd provided substantial care. The documentation I was keeping would be crucial. She also explained that while Eleanor could certainly leave her estate to Daniel alone, my contributions to Eleanor's care during her final years could be considered when determining marital assets. "But there's something else you should know," Patricia said during one of our meetings. "If Eleanor passes away while you're still providing care, and if you can prove that your career and financial situation suffered significantly because of that care, you might have grounds for a claim against the estate. It's complicated and not guaranteed, but it's possible." I didn't want Eleanor to die. Despite everything, despite that horrible will, she was still a human being struggling with her health. But I also couldn't ignore the injustice of what she'd done. Daniel remained oblivious. He was grateful, loving, constantly telling me how amazing I was for taking care of his mother. He had no idea about the will. He had no idea that his mother had essentially tried to write me out of his life. "Should I tell him?" I asked Patricia during one session. "That's up to you," she said. "But ask yourself, is he the kind of man who'd stand up to his mother? Or would he defend her choices?" I didn't have an answer. Daniel loved me. I believed that. But he also idolized his mother. If I forced him to choose, I wasn't sure which way he'd go. And I wasn't ready to risk my marriage over a will that might never matter. So I kept my secret and continued caring for Eleanor. Slowly, she regained her strength. By month 4, she could walk with a cane. By month 5, she was managing most daily tasks independently. Her doctors were impressed with her recovery. They credited her determination and, I quote, "the excellent care she's obviously receiving at home." Eleanor never thanked me. Not really. She'd make small acknowledgments like, "That's a decent meal, Victoria," or "You did well driving in that traffic." But there was never genuine gratitude, never recognition of what I'd sacrificed. Then, one evening, Everything came crashing down. Daniel came home from work early, his face pale and drawn. He asked his mother to join us in the living room. And I knew. Somehow, I just knew. "Mom," he started, his voice shaking, "I got a call from your lawyer today. He said it's time to review your estate planning now that you're recovering. He mentioned some specific provisions in your will regarding Victoria." Eleanor's face went carefully blank. She didn't look at me. "Daniel, that's between me and my attorney." "No," he said, and I heard steel in his voice I'd never heard before. "No, Mom, it's not. When your will specifically excludes my wife, the woman who's put her entire life on hold to care for you, that involves me too." My heart was pounding. He knew. Somehow he'd found out. "The lawyer sent me a copy," Daniel continued. "He thought I should be aware before we had the review meeting. So I read it. All of it." Eleanor finally looked at me, and what I saw in her eyes wasn't shame or apology. It was defiance. "I have the right to leave my estate to whomever I choose." "You absolutely do," I said, speaking for the first time. My voice was calmer than I felt. "You have every right to give everything to Daniel. But what you wrote about me, Eleanor, those things about me being a gold digger, about me not having family values because I have a career, that was cruel. Especially when I've spent the last 5 months caring for you. I did what I thought was necessary to protect my son's future." "Protect him from what?" Daniel's voice rose. "From his wife? The woman who loves him? Who sacrificed her job advancement and her income to take care of you?" Eleanor stood up, leaning heavily on her cane. "I built everything I have through hard work and sacrifice. I won't apologize for wanting to ensure it stays with my blood family." "I'm family," I said quietly. "I became family when I married your son. But you never really saw me that way, did you? I was always temporary, always under evaluation, never quite good enough." "Because you're not," Eleanor said, and there it was. The truth she'd been holding back for years. "You're educated and accomplished, yes, but you don't understand what family means. You don't prioritize my son the way a wife should. You're too independent, too focused on yourself." The words hung in the air like poison. Daniel stared at his mother, and I watched something shift in his face. The idealized image he'd held of her his entire life was cracking. "Get out," he said. Eleanor blinked. "What? Get out of our house! Pack your things! I'll help you move back to your place tomorrow, but tonight you need to leave." "Daniel," she started, but he held up his hand. "I have spent my entire life trying to live up to your standards, trying to be the son you wanted, and I married a woman who did the same thing, who tried so hard to earn your approval. Victoria has been nothing but kind and patient and selfless with you. She put her career on hold. She's here every single day, taking care of your every need. And you think she's not good enough?" Eleanor's face hardened. "If you choose her over your own mother, you'll regret it. If I don't choose her, I'll regret it for the rest of my life." For the first time since I'd met Eleanor Hayes, I saw her at a loss for words. She looked between us, searching for the son who'd always deferred to her judgment, who'd always put her first. He wasn't there anymore. She left that night, calling a car service to take her back to Cambridge. She could manage in her own home now, with some visiting nurse support. She didn't need us anymore. Or more accurately, she didn't need me. After she left, Daniel held me while I cried. Not from sadness, exactly, but from relief. From the release of 5 months of pretending, of swallowing hurt, of caring for someone who saw me as an obstacle. "I'm so sorry," he kept saying. "I should have known. I should have seen how she treated you. You loved your mother. You still do. That's not wrong. But the way she treated you is wrong. The things she said about you are wrong." We talked through the night. I told him about finding the will weeks earlier, about my meetings with Patricia, about the documentation I'd been keeping. I expected him to be angry that I'd kept secrets, but instead, he just looked sad. "You were protecting yourself," he said. "I hate that you felt you had to, but I understand." In the following days, we made decisions together. Daniel would accept his eventual inheritance. We weren't going to reject it out of spite. But we agreed to donate a significant portion to causes we both cared about. Women's education programs, career development for working mothers, organizations that supported family caregivers. We'd use Eleanor's money to help people she'd dismissed as unworthy. I also decided to move forward with a claim for caregiver compensation. Patricia helped me file the paperwork, meticulously documented with my journals and receipts. It wasn't about revenge. It was about recognition that my time and care had value, even if Eleanor didn't think so. If you feel my words, show your support by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. And tell me from which city you belong, so I can see how far a woman's impactful voice can reach. Help me build this community so we can bring more truthful stories for you. Because women like us, we need to stand together. We need to recognize our worth, even when others refuse to. Eleanor didn't speak to us for weeks. Then one day, I received a letter in the mail. Her handwriting, elegant and precise as always. "Victoria, I have had time to reflect on what occurred. I do not apologize for protecting my son's inheritance. That is a mother's duty. However, I recognize that I misjudged your intentions. You cared for me with dedication I did not expect, and perhaps did not deserve. I am not accustomed to being wrong, but in this instance, I was. I hope you and Daniel can find happiness, and I hope that one day we might find a way to coexist civilly. Eleanor." It wasn't the apology I deserved. It was barely an acknowledgement, but it was something. A crack in the armor of her self-righteousness. But I was done seeking Eleanor's approval. Done trying to prove my worth to someone who decided I had none. I had my husband's love. I had my self-respect. I had evidence that my sacrifices mattered, even if she couldn't admit it. 6 months after Eleanor moved out, my caregiver compensation claim was settled. The estate attorney reviewed my documentation and, likely wanting to avoid a lengthy legal battle, agreed to a payment of $75,000. It wasn't about the money, though that amount did represent roughly what I'd lost in income and career advancement. It was about the principle. My time, my care, my sacrifice, it all had value, legally recognized value. Eleanor contested it initially, of course. She had her lawyer send threatening letters about how I was proving myself to be exactly what she'd accused me of being, a gold digger. But Patricia shut that down quickly. "Mrs. Hayes, your client received over 2,000 hours of skilled nursing care, transportation services, meal preparation, and household management from Mrs. Chen. At market rates, that care would have cost over $150,000. We're asking for half of that. If she'd like to take this to court, we'll be happy to present our case to a judge." The check arrived 3 weeks later. I stared at it for a long time before depositing it. Then, I did something Eleanor would never expect. I donated $25,000 to a scholarship fund for women returning to architecture school after career breaks. Women like me, who'd sacrificed their professional momentum for family and needed help getting back on track. Daniel found me crying at the kitchen table after I'd made the donation. "Are you okay?" he asked. "I'm perfect," I said, and meant it. I just made sure Eleanor's money is helping women she'd probably look down on. Women who choose both career and family. Women who refuse to shrink themselves to fit someone else's definition of worthiness. He kissed the top of my head. "I love you so much." I went back to work gradually. My firm had held my position, barely, though I'd been passed over for the promotion I'd been offered before Eleanor's stroke. That stung. But my boss, Catherine, promised me it was temporary. What you did for your family was admirable, she said. But Victoria, don't lose yourself in other people's expectations again. You're brilliant. Don't let anyone make you forget that. I threw myself back into my work with renewed passion. I was designing a community center in Dorchester, a project I cared deeply about. It would serve underprivileged families, providing after-school programs, job training, and community resources. Every beam I designed, every space I crafted felt like I was building something that mattered beyond Eleanor's narrow definition of worth. Eleanor and I maintained a cold distance. She'd call Daniel occasionally, always asking about him, never about me. He put her on speaker sometimes, and I'd hear her voice, still sharp and commanding, and feel nothing. No anger, no hurt, just indifference. She'd lost her power over me. Then something unexpected happened. It was a Thursday afternoon, about 9 months after Eleanor had moved out. I was at a coffee shop near my office, reviewing blueprints, when someone sat down across from me. I looked up, ready to tell them the table was taken, and froze. Eleanor. She looked older somehow, more fragile than I remembered. But her eyes were still sharp, still assessing. "May I sit?" she asked. "You already are," I replied. A small smile crossed her face. "Fair enough. Victoria, I won't take much of your time. I know you're working. But I needed to speak with you privately." I set down my pen, giving her my full attention, but not my warmth. "What do you need, Eleanor?" She took a breath, and for the first time since I'd known her, she looked uncertain. "I received a diagnosis last week. The doctors found a mass on my pancreas. It's cancer. Stage 3. The words hit me like cold water. "I'm sorry to hear that." "I'm not here for pity. I'm here because I'm facing my mortality, and I've realized I have regrets." She looked directly at me. "You were right that night. About everything. I never gave you a fair chance. I judged you from the beginning because you weren't what I'd imagined for Daniel. You had your own ambitions, your own life, and I saw that as a threat rather than a strength. I didn't know what to say, so I said nothing. When I had my stroke, when you cared for me day after day, I kept waiting for you to fail, to prove my suspicions correct, to show me that you were only there out of obligation or calculation. But you never did. You were kind when I was cruel. You were patient when I was impossible. And I repaid that kindness by keeping that horrible will, by maintaining my judgments even as you proved them wrong. Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I'm dying, Victoria. And I don't want to die with this between us. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I want you to know that I was wrong. About you, about what makes a good wife, about what family means. Daniel chose well, better than I could see." Tears were running down her face now, and despite everything, I felt something soften in my chest. Not forgiveness, not yet, but perhaps the beginning of something like understanding. "You hurt me, Eleanor, deeply, not just with the will, but with years of subtle dismissals and judgments. You made me feel like I had to earn my place in my own marriage. I know, and I'm sorrier than I can express." She reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. "This is a revised will. My attorney has the official copy. Daniel still inherits the bulk of the estate. That hasn't changed, but I've added a provision. $200,000 to you personally, with a letter explaining that it's inadequate compensation for the care and patience you showed me, but it's my attempt to acknowledge your value. And now I don't want your money, Eleanor, so I know that's precisely why you should have it." She pushed the envelope across the table. "There's something else in here. A letter I've written to Daniel, explaining everything. My prejudices, my mistakes, my recognition of your worth. I've asked him to share it with any children you have. I want them to know that their grandmother was flawed and foolish, but that their mother was extraordinary. And yep, my throat was tight. I don't know what to say. Say you'll think about it. Say you'll consider giving an old, dying woman a chance to make even a tiny bit of amends. She stood up slowly, leaning on her cane. I don't expect you to visit me in the hospital. I don't expect anything from you, Victoria. But I hope you know that you are the daughter I was too blind to appreciate. She left before I could respond, moving slowly through the coffee shop and out into the autumn afternoon. I sat there with the envelope in my hands, crying quietly, while other patrons pretended not to notice. That evening, I showed Daniel the envelope. We read the revised will together, then the letter she'd written. It was raw and honest, detailing her own mother's impossible standards, her fear that she'd raised a son who was too soft, her belief that only hardship built character. She wrote about watching me care for her and feeling ashamed, but too proud to admit she'd been wrong. The hardest part was this section. I told myself I was protecting you, Daniel, but I was really protecting myself. Protecting the image I had of what your life should look like. Victoria threatened that image, not because she was wrong for you, but because she was so clearly right. And that meant admitting I didn't know best. Admitting that my way wasn't the only way. Pride has been my constant companion and my greatest flaw. Daniel was crying. We both were. What do you want to do? He asked me. I thought about it for a long time. I thought about the woman who dismissed me for years. I thought about the woman who'd sat across from me in that coffee shop, facing death and trying to make peace. I thought about what kind of person I wanted to be, not for Eleanor, but for myself. I want to visit her, I said finally. Not for her, for me. Because holding on to this anger is exhausting, and life is too short to carry hatred for someone who's dying. So I visited Eleanor in the hospital, then at her home when she was discharged. I didn't go every day, didn't sacrifice my career again, but I went. We had careful, sometimes awkward conversations. She asked about my work, really asked, and listened to my answers. She told me stories about her own business, about the struggles of being a woman entrepreneur in the 70s and 80s. One afternoon, sitting in her sunroom while she rested in her chair, she said something that stayed with me. I was so afraid of being seen as weak, of needing anyone. When Harold died, I decided I'd never depend on someone again. But I took it too far. I made independence into isolation. I made strength into cruelty. Don't make my mistakes, Victoria. Let people help you. Let people love you without proving you deserve it. I won't, I promised, and I meant it. Eleanor passed away 4 months later, in January, surrounded by hospice nurses and soft music. Daniel and I were there, holding her hands. Her last words were to me, "Thank you for seeing past my pride." The funeral was small but dignified. People from her business community came, old friends, distant relatives. They all shared stories of Eleanor's generosity, her sharp mind, her determination. And they thanked me for being there at the end, for giving her peace. The revised will was read 2 weeks later. Everything was as Eleanor had described. Daniel inherited the house and the bulk of the estate. But there was $200,000 set aside for me, with explicit language stating it was recognition of my value and contribution, not as a caregiver, but as a person of worth who'd been misjudged. There was also a letter, a copy of what she'd written to Daniel, but addressed to me. In it she wrote, "Victoria, you taught me that strength isn't about independence, it's about character. You showed me grace when I deserved judgment. You gave me care when I'd given you dismissal. You are the woman I wish I'd been brave enough to be. Thank you for being my daughter, even when I failed to be your mother. Use this money to build something beautiful, because that's what you do. You build beauty in a world that often tears it down." I did cry then, for the relationship we could have had, for the years wasted in mutual distrust, for the woman Eleanor could have been if she'd let herself be vulnerable, but also for the strange, complicated gift she'd given me at the end. Recognition, acknowledgement, respect. Daniel and I used some of Eleanor's inheritance to establish a foundation in her name, the Eleanor Hayes Foundation for Women in Business. It provides grants and mentorship for women starting their own companies, especially women returning to work after caregiving responsibilities. Every year, we give 5 women $20,000 each and pair them with successful business mentors. It's what Eleanor would have done if she'd been able to see past her own pride. I kept the $200,000 she'd left me and invested it in my career. I started my own architecture firm, specializing in community spaces and affordable housing. Chen Design Studio opened 18 months after Eleanor died, with 3 employees and 2 major contracts. Now, 3 years later, we have 12 employees and a waiting list of clients. The community center I designed in Dorchester opened last spring. At the ribbon cutting, I gave a speech about how buildings should serve people, not the other way around. How spaces can heal and empower and transform lives. In the audience was Catherine from my old firm, my husband Daniel, my lawyer Patricia, who'd become a friend, and several women who'd received grants from Eleanor's foundation. I thought about Eleanor watching from somewhere, and I hoped she was proud. Not because I needed her approval anymore, but because I'd taken her resources and her name and created something that contradicted everything she'd initially believed about women like me. Women who wanted both career and family. Women who refused to shrink. Women who knew their worth. If you feel my words, show your support by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. And tell me from which city you belong so I can see how far a woman's impactful voice can reach. Help me build this community so we can bring more truthful stories for you. Because that's what this story is really about. It's about knowing your worth, even when the people closest to you don't see it. It's about documenting your contributions because your work matters. It's about the long, hard road to forgiveness, not for others, but for yourself. Last month, Daniel and I found out I'm pregnant. We're having a daughter. We've decided to name her Elena, a variation of Eleanor, but softer, more open. When Elena grows up, I'll tell her about her grandmother, the good and the bad, the pride and the prejudice, the cruelty and the eventual grace. But more importantly, I'll tell her about me, about how I fought for my worth, about how I refused to accept someone else's narrow definition of what I should be, about how I cared for someone who didn't deserve it because that's who I chose to be, not because I was seeking approval. I'll teach Elena that she doesn't have to earn love, that her career and her family aren't opposing forces, but parts of a whole life, that independence isn't about rejecting help, but about knowing you're strong enough to ask for it, that forgiveness is possible, but boundaries are necessary. And I'll tell her that sometimes the people who hurt us the most are the ones who teach us the most impudent lessons. Not the lessons they intended to teach, but the lessons we learn by surviving them and choosing to be different. The pregnancy was harder than I expected. Morning sickness that lasted all day, exhaustion that made even simple tasks feel overwhelming, and anxiety that I tried to hide, but Daniel could always see through. What worried me most wasn't the physical toll, but the fear that I'd somehow repeat Eleanor's patterns with my own daughter. What if I'm too controlling? I asked Daniel one night, lying in bed with his hand on my growing belly. What if I hurt her the way Eleanor hurt me? You won't, he said with certainty. You know what that pain feels like. You'll recognize the warning signs. But Eleanor probably thought she was doing the right thing too, protecting you, preparing you for a hard world. He was quiet for a moment. Then, the difference is you're asking these questions. My mother never questioned herself. She never wondered if she was wrong. That self-awareness is what will save you from becoming her. I hoped he was right. I started going to therapy, working through my complicated feelings about Eleanor, about motherhood, about what kind of parent I wanted to be. My therapist, Dr. Sarah Okonkwo, was a Nigerian immigrant who'd built her practice from nothing while raising 3 kids. She understood the pressure of trying to be everything to everyone. Stop! You're not responsible for healing Eleanor's wounds through your parenting, she told me during one session. You're responsible for being present with your own daughter, for seeing her as she is, not as you want her to be. That's the gift Eleanor couldn't give you, but you can give it to Elena. So, I held on to those words through the rest of my pregnancy. When Elena was born on a cool October morning, Daniel cried. I cried. The nurses cried because apparently we were all very emotional people. But holding my daughter, looking into her scrunched up face, I felt something settle in my chest. Peace, purpose, a sense that all the pain and struggle had led to this moment. Elena was 3 months old when I received an unexpected visitor. I was working from home, Elena napping in her bassinet beside my desk, when the doorbell rang. Through the window, I saw a woman in her 70s, well-dressed, holding a gift bag. I opened the door cautiously. Can I help you? Victoria? I'm Helen Morrison. I was Eleanor's best friend for 40 years. I knew the name. Eleanor had mentioned Helen occasionally, usually in the context of stories from decades ago. Come in. Helen settled into our living room with the practiced ease of someone used to making herself at home. She peeked into the bassinet where Elena slept. She's beautiful. She has Daniel's nose. Everyone says that. Would you like some tea? Over tea, Helen told me why she'd come. Eleanor talked about you constantly those last few months. She regretted so much, Victoria, but she was also proud. Proud that you'd stood up to her. Proud that Daniel had chosen you. She told me once that you were the daughter she'd been too damaged to deserve. That's generous of her to say after everything. Helen's smile was sad. Eleanor's mother was a terror. Cruel, manipulative, impossible to please. Eleanor spent her whole life trying to earn that woman's approval and never got it. When her mother died, Eleanor inherited everything, but never felt like she'd earned it. I think that's why she was so controlling with Daniel. She was trying to make sure he didn't feel that same inadequacy. But she just passed it on differently. Exactly. Helen reached into her gift bag. Eleanor asked me to give you something if you ever had a daughter. She made me promise years ago, long before she got sick. She pulled out a small wooden box, worn with age. Inside was a collection of photographs, old black and white images of a young Eleanor. In one, she was maybe 25, wearing work clothes and standing in front of a small restaurant. Her first business. Her face was radiant, proud, unguarded. There were other photos, too. Eleanor with her husband Harold, looking genuinely happy. Eleanor holding baby Daniel, her face soft with love. Eleanor at various ages, building her business, facing challenges, celebrating victories. These were photos of a woman before pride and fear had hardened her. She wanted you to know who she was before she became who she was, if that makes sense, Helen said. She wanted Elena to know her grandmother wasn't just the bitter old woman at the end. She was young once, full of dreams, scared sometimes, human. I traced my finger over the photo of young Eleanor. Thank you for bringing these. There's one more thing. Helen pulled out an envelope. Eleanor wrote this years ago, right after she updated her will the first time, the cruel one. She never sent it because she was too proud. but she kept it. After you started visiting her in the hospital, she gave it to me and said, "If I don't make things right before I die, give this to Victoria. Let her know the truth." I opened the envelope with shaking hands. Inside was a letter in Eleanor's precise handwriting, dated 4 years ago. "Dear Victoria, I'm writing this letter I will never send to explain why I cannot accept you. It is not because you're inadequate. It is because you are everything I wanted to be and couldn't. You are educated, accomplished, independent, and you make it look effortless. You have Daniel's love without having to manipulate or control him. You have a career that fulfills you. You have friends and interests beyond your family. When I look at you, I see all the choices I was too afraid to make, all the risks I wouldn't take, all the possibilities I closed off in pursuit of safety and control. I resent you for that. I resent that you get to have what I denied myself. So I'm trying to deny you what you want, your place in this family, your security, your inheritance. It's petty and cruel, and I know it even as I do it. But I cannot seem to stop myself. Perhaps one day I will be brave enough to admit this to your face. Perhaps I will learn to celebrate your success instead of resenting it. But today, I am still too small, too scared, too proud. I'm sorry for what I am about to do to you. I'm sorry I'm not strong enough to stop myself. Eleanor." I read it 3 times, tears streaming down my face. Daniel, who'd come home during Helen's visit, read it over my shoulder. He was crying too. "She knew," he whispered. "All along she knew she was wrong." "Knowing and changing are different things," I said. "But at least she knew. At least at the end she tried." Helen stayed for another hour, sharing stories about Eleanor that painted a fuller picture. The Eleanor who'd quietly paid for 3 employees to go to college. The Eleanor who'd shown up at Helen's house every day for a month after Helen's husband died, bringing food and company. The Eleanor who'd been more complex than I'd ever understood. After Helen left, Daniel and I sat together on the couch, Elena now awake and nursing. "We need to make sure we don't repeat these patterns," I said. "With Elena. With each other. We won't," he promised. "We're already breaking them." We're talking. We're aware. We're choosing differently. And we did choose differently. As Elena grew, we made conscious decisions about the kind of parents we wanted to be. When she was 2 and insistent on doing everything herself, we let her struggle and succeed and sometimes fail. When she was 4 and wanted to take piano lessons, then quit after 2 months, we let her without judgment. When she was 6 and announced she wanted to be a doctor, then a week later said she wanted to be a dancer, we supported both dreams equally. I went back to Chen Design Studio part-time, then full-time as Elena started school. Daniel adjusted his schedule to be home for pickups and homework. We traded off sick days and school events. Neither of us was the primary parent. We were partners. The Eleanor Hayes Foundation for Women in Business continued to grow. By Elena's 7th birthday, we'd helped launch over 50 women-owned businesses. Each year, we held a gala fundraiser where grant recipients shared their stories. I made sure Elena attended, even at a young age. I wanted her to see women supporting women, to understand that success could be shared, not hoarded. A grant recipient named Maria spoke about how she'd left an abusive marriage with 3 kids and no job skills. The foundation had given her money to start a house cleaning business. And now, 5 years later, she employed 15 other women escaping domestic violence. As Maria spoke, I saw Eleanor in my mind. The Eleanor who could have been. The Eleanor who might have celebrated women like Maria instead of judging them. After the event, Elena asked me, "Grandma Eleanor helped start this?" Yes, she did. At the end of her life, she wanted to help women like Maria. Women who were starting over. Women who needed support. Did you like Grandma Eleanor? I thought carefully about my answer. I loved her. But Our relationship was complicated. She hurt me sometimes, but she also taught me important lessons, even if she didn't mean to. What lessons? That you have to know your own worth, even when other people don't see it. That forgiveness is possible, but boundaries are necessary. That people can change, even at the end. And that just because someone hurts you doesn't mean you have to hurt them back. Elena nodded seriously, processing this in the way children do. I'm glad she helped those ladies. Me too, sweetheart. Me too. When Elena was 9, we moved into a bigger house. My firm had grown significantly. Daniel had been promoted to partner at his company, and we needed more space. As we were packing, I found the box Helen had given me years ago, the one with Eleanor's photos and letter. I sat on the floor of our bedroom, surrounded by moving boxes, and looked through those photos again. Young Eleanor staring back at me with such hope and determination. I thought about all the years between that photo and the bitter woman who'd written me out of her will. What had happened in between? What small moments of fear and pride had accumulated into such hardness? But I also thought about the Eleanor who'd sat across from me in that coffee shop, dying and trying to make amends. The Eleanor who'd revised her will and written letters of explanation. The Eleanor who'd saved photos and letters for her future granddaughter, even when she didn't know if we'd ever reconcile. People are complicated. That's what I was learning as I got older. They can be cruel and kind, petty and generous, closed off and vulnerable. Sometimes all in the same day. Eleanor had been all those things, and so was I. And so would Elena be. The difference was awareness, the willingness to question ourselves, the courage to admit when we're wrong. Those were the gifts I could give my daughter that Eleanor hadn't been able to give me until it was almost too late. I packed the box carefully, marking it Elena for when you're older. One day, when she was mature enough to understand nuance, I'd give her these photos and letters. I'd tell her the whole story, not a sanitized version, but the truth, the hurt and the healing, the judgment and the forgiveness, the inheritance that was more than money. Chen Design Studio celebrated its 10th anniversary, the same year Elena started middle school. We'd grown to 35 employees, had won numerous design awards, and had projects in 3 states. I stood at the anniversary party, looking around at the team I'd built, the spaces we'd created, the lives we'd impacted through thoughtful design. Catherine from my old firm was there. She raised her glass to me. To Victoria, who proved that you can have it all, just not all at once, and not without help. Everyone laughed and raised their glasses. Daniel was there with Elena, both beaming with pride. I thought about the Victoria who'd sat in that coffee shop years ago, looking at Eleanor's cruel will and wondering if she was worthy. I thought about how far I'd come, not despite Eleanor, but in some strange way, because of her. Elena approached me as the party wound down. Mom, can I ask you something? Of course, honey. You're successful, right? Like, your business is good. We're doing well, yes. And you and Dad are happy? Very happy. So you can have a career and a family? They're not opposites? I knelt down to her level, even though at 12 she was almost as tall as me now. No, sweetheart, they're not opposites. They're both parts of a full life. Anyone who tells you that you have to choose one or the other is working from old, limited ideas about what women can be. Did Grandma Eleanor think that? She did at first, but she changed her mind. That's the important part. She realized she was wrong, and she tried to make it right. People can grow, even when they're old. Even when they've been stuck in their ways for years. Elena hugged me tight. I'm proud of you, Mom. Those words, coming from my daughter, meant more than any design award or business success. I'm proud of you too, baby. Every single day. The years continued. Elena grew into a thoughtful, confident teenager. She inherited Daniel's analytical mind, and, I like to think, my creativity and determination. She also inherited Eleanor's sharp tongue, though she used it to defend others rather than tear them down. When a classmate was being bullied for being too ambitious, too smart, too much, Elena shut it down with a speech about supporting each other's success. The principal called me in, concerned about Elena's forceful defense of her classmate. I listened to the story and smiled. She gets that from her grandmother. Both of them, actually. Chen Design Studio launched an apprenticeship program for young women interested in architecture. Every summer, we brought in 5 high school students and taught them the basics of design, gave them real project experience, and mentored them through the college application process. Several of our former apprentices had gone on to prestigious architecture programs. One summer, when Elena was 16, she asked if she could join the apprenticeship program. I wanted to say yes immediately, to give her every opportunity. But I caught myself. Why do you want to do this? I asked. Because I love watching you work. Because I want to understand what makes you light up like that. And because I think I might want to be an architect too, but I'm not sure, and this would help me figure it out. Those were good reasons, authentic ones. So I said yes, but with conditions. You'll be treated like any other apprentice. No special favors because you're the boss's daughter. You'll work just as hard. You'll take criticism. And if you decide architecture isn't for you, that's completely okay. Deal, she said, shaking my hand seriously. Watching Elena that summer, seeing her bend over blueprints with the same intense focus I recognized in myself, I felt Eleanor's presence. Not haunting, but present, like she was watching too. This legacy she'd never intended, but had somehow created. A granddaughter who knew her worth, who pursued her passions without apology, who understood that strength wasn't about independence, but about character. On the last day of the apprenticeship program, I gave all the students the same speech I gave every year. You are entering a field that still has barriers for women. You will be questioned, doubted, dismissed. Your ideas will be attributed to male colleagues. Your authority will be challenged. But here's what I want you to remember. Your worth is not determined by others' recognition of it. Your value is not dependent on approval. You are architects, builders, creators. That's who you are, regardless of who sees it. After the others left, Elena stayed behind. Was that about Grandma Eleanor? Partly. Also about my own experiences. About every woman who's had to fight to be taken seriously. Will it be like that for me? Probably less than it was for me, and much less than it was for her. But yes, you'll face it. The question is, how will you respond? Like you did, standing firm, knowing my worth, building anyway. That's my girl. The Eleanor Hayes Foundation celebrated its 15th anniversary the year Elena graduated high school. She decided on architecture school at MIT, Daniel's alma mater. At the anniversary gala, we announced a new initiative, full ride scholarships for 3 women each year pursuing architecture, engineering, or construction management. The Eleanor Hayes Scholarships for Women Who Build. I gave a speech that night about Eleanor. Not the sanitized version, but the truth. I talked about her initial cruelty, her inability to accept me, the will that had tried to erase my worth. But I also talked about her transformation, her apologies, her attempts to make amends. And I talked about how her legacy was now supporting women who would build a more equitable world. What Eleanor taught me, I said to the crowd of supporters and grant recipients, sometimes without meaning to, is that our greatest pain can become our most powerful purpose. She hurt me by trying to diminish my worth. So I spent years proving my worth, not to her, but to myself. And now we use her name and resources to tell other women that they are worthy, exactly as they are, career and family and dreams and all. And then the applause was thunderous. Daniel and Elena stood in the front row, both crying. After the speech, a young woman approached me, one of our scholarship recipients. She was maybe 22, eyes bright with determination. And then an angering face stood next to me, turning his face to me. She was maybe 22, eyes bright with determination. "It's M.A. Miss Chen, I just want you to say thank you. Not just for the money, but for the story. My own mother told me I was wasting my time pursuing engineering, that I should focus on finding a husband and having kids. Your story helped me realize I don't have to choose. I can have both if I want them, or neither, or just one. It's my choice." I hugged her tight. "That's exactly right. It's your choice. Never let anyone take that from you." As she walked away, I felt Eleanor's presence again. And this time, I could almost hear her voice, grudging but genuine. "You did well, Victoria. Better than I could have. You built something beautiful." If you feel my words, show your support by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. And tell me from which city you belong, so I can see how far a woman's impactful voice can reach. Help me build this community so we can bring more truthful stories for you. Because these stories matter. Your story matters. Every woman who's had to fight for recognition, who's had to prove her worth, who's chosen herself even when others demanded she shrink. Your story matters. Elena is 24 now, finishing her master's degree in architecture. She's brilliant, passionate, and unapologetically ambitious. She has Daniel's analytical skills and my creative vision, and she has something neither Eleanor nor I fully possessed at her age. The certainty that she doesn't have to earn her place in the world. That her worth is inherent, not conditional. Last week, she called me from her studio in Cambridge, excited about a project she's working on. "Mom, I'm designing a community center for immigrant women. It'll have childcare, job training, language classes, everything they need in one place. And thinking about Grandma Eleanor, how she built her business from nothing, how she could have used support like this." "That's beautiful, honey. She would love that. Now, tell me something. Did you ever fully forgive her?" Forgiveness is complicated. I made peace with what happened. I understood why she acted the way she did. And I chose not to carry the anger anymore. But forgive? That word implies absolving her, saying it's okay what she did. It wasn't okay. It hurt. But I released the hold that hurt had on me. Is that forgiveness? Or just liberation? I think it's both. Maybe you're right. After we hung up, I sat in my office at Chen Design Studio, looking at a photo on my desk. It's from Eleanor's deathbed. One of the last photos taken. She's holding newborn Elena, her face soft with wonder and regret. Beside it is a photo from last month, Elena at her graduate thesis presentation, confident and radiant. 2 generations, connected by me, by the bridge I built between Eleanor's pain and Elena's possibility. That's legacy, I think. Not money, not buildings, not even businesses. It's the lessons we learn from suffering and transform into strength for the next generation. My phone buzzes with a text from Daniel. Elena just sent me her community center designs. I'm crying at my desk. She's building the world we dreamed of. I text back a heart emoji, because sometimes that's all you need to say. Then I open my laptop and get back to work on my current project. An affordable housing complex designed specifically for single mothers re-entering the workforce. This is who I am now. Victoria Chen, architect, business owner, mother, daughter-in-law to a complicated woman who taught me hard lessons, wife to a man who chose me over his mother's prejudices, designer of spaces that hold and heal people. I am not defined by Eleanor's initial rejection of me. I am not limited by her narrow view of women's worth. But I am shaped in some strange way by the fight she forced me to have for my dignity, for my place, for my right to exist as a whole person with career and family and dreams. If Eleanor taught me anything, it's this. Your worth is not a question. It's not something to prove or earn or apologize for. It simply is. And anyone who asks you to diminish yourself, to choose between parts of yourself, to shrink so they can feel larger, they're the ones with the problem, not you. Never you. So to every woman listening to this story, whether you're in New York or Mumbai or Lagos or anywhere in the world where a woman's voice can reach, I want you to know this. You are worthy. Your ambitions are valid. Your choices are your own. And if someone tries to write you out of your own story, take the pen back. Write your own ending. Build your own legacy. That's what I did. That's what my daughter is doing. That's what thousands of women supported by the Eleanor Hayes Foundation are doing every day. We're taking the hurt and transforming it. We're taking the rejection and using it as fuel. We're taking the judgment and proving it wrong. Not for those who doubted us, but for ourselves. And when we succeed, when we build our businesses and raise our children and create our art and live our full, complicated, beautiful lives, we're not just winning for ourselves. We're changing the narrative for every woman who comes after us. That's the real inheritance. Not money, not property, not even apologies or acknowledgement, though those matter too. The real inheritance is the permission we give the next generation to be fully themselves, to know their worth, to build without apology. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for being part of this community. And remember, wherever you are, whatever your fight, whatever inheritance you're fighting for or against, you matter. Your voice matters. Your story matters. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. With love and solidarity, from Boston to wherever you are, Victoria Chen.